One of the most common comments on my last video for Blaster Blade is that we have a follow-up video on Blaster Dark, which I think is pretty fitting. And to be honest, I thought there were a ton of support cards for Blaster Blade, but it turns out Blaster Dark has a lot more. And it all started with the original Blaster Dark, whose ability was continuous on Vanguard. If you have a card named Blaster Javelin in your soul, it got 1000 power. It also had the auto ability that when placed on Vanguard, you could counterblast 2, choose one of your opponent's rearguards, and retire it. This card was involved in one of the first true ride chains that we had, and for that to be used, we had to start with Full Bow. Full Bow had the ability that when a card named Blaster Javelin wrote it, you could search your deck for one unit named Blaster Dark, reveal it to your opponent, and add it to your hand. Then shuffle your deck. Blaster Javelin, on the other hand, had the ability that when a card named Full Bow was in your soul, it got plus 2000 power on Vanguard. You could also choose a grade 3 from your hand and discard it when it was placed on rearguard, and you were able to search your deck for one copy of Phantom Blaster Dragon, reveal it to your opponent, and put it to your hand. Then you shuffle your deck. In this way, you could basically guarantee that you would get a perfect ride chain just by having Blaster Javelin. So if you started on Full Bow, Blaster Javelin would get his 2000 boost, Blaster Dark would get his 1000 boost, and if you made it all the way to Phantom Blaster Dragon, Phantom Blaster Dragon also had the ability that on Vanguard, if you had Blaster Dark in soul, which at this point you probably did, he would get a constant plus 1000 power. It also had the ability that on Vanguard you could counterblast 2, choose 3 of your Shadow Paladin rearguards and retire them, and this unit got plus 10,000 power and an extra critical until the end of the turn. Of course, Blaster Dark had a few unique support cards that weren't part of the ride chain, and starting with the grade 1s, we had Doran Bow. When this unit boosted a unit named Blaster Dark, the boosted unit would get 4000 power until the end of the turn. We also had the much less commonly used Demon World Castle Donnerschlag. This was a grade 2 with the Vanguard and Rearguard ability that if you didn't have a Phantom Blaster Dragon or Blaster Dark on your Vanguard circle, it would lose 5000 power. That being said, when it did attack, it would get 2000 power until the end of the battle. It was basically a high-risk, low-reward kind of card. And of course, the last support card for Blaster Dark himself was Majesty Lord Blaster. This was a grade 3 Royal Paladin card that had the ability on Vanguard. If you have a Blaster Dark and Blaster Blade in soul, this unit gets plus 2000 power and a critical. It also had the ability that when it attacked, you could choose a Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark from your rearguard, put them into your soul, and give this unit plus 10,000 until the end of that battle. And Majesty Lord Blaster is actually the reason why you're allowed to run 4 Blaster Darks in any Royal Paladin deck in the premium format. Of course, Blaster Dark also got a V-Series printing, however this card didn't get too much support in itself. It had the ability that when placed on Vanguard or Rearguard, you could counterblast 1 and force your opponent to choose one of his or her rearguards to retire. It also had the ability that on Vanguard, once per turn, if your opponent had no rearguards, you could discard a card from hand and give it plus 1 drive check until the end of the turn. Anyways, back to the original series, the next Blaster Dark we saw was Blaster Dark Spirit. When placed on Rearguard from your deck, you could counterblast 1, and if you did, you could choose one of your opponent's grade 2 or less rearguards in the front row to retire. Furthermore, on Rearguard, at the end of the battle that it was attacked, it would be retired. It also had the continuous ability that this card was also a Gold Paladin unit. The next Blaster Dark that we saw was Blaster Dark Revenger. For the cost of Counterblast 2 when it was placed on Vanguard or Rearguard, if you had a Revenger Vanguard, you could choose one of your opponent's rearguards in the front row to retire. He saw support in Frontline Revenger Cloudus, who had the Forerunner ability, which called him to rearguard when he was rode upon. It also had the Counterblast 1 ability on Rearguard that you could put this unit into soul, and if you had a grade 3 or greater Shadow Paladin Vanguard, you could search your deck for one unit named Blaster Dark Revenger, call it to Rearguard, and shuffle your deck. This was oftentimes comboed with Barrier Troop Revenger Dorant, who had the ability on Rearguard that when your Blaster Dark Revenger was placed on Rearguard or Vanguard, in the same column as this unit, if you had a Vanguard with Revenger in its card name, you could unflip a damage. Of course, Revengers in themselves saw a decent amount of support, however there were no other cards which directly mentioned Blaster Dark Revenger until Blaster Dark Revenger Abyss. This unit had the ability that when placed on Rearguard, if you had a Revenger Vanguard, you could choose one of your opponent's grade 1 or less rearguards to retire. And of course, its Legion mate was Revenger Phantom Blaster Abyss. This card had a Act Legion ability for 20,000 with Blaster Dark Revenger Abyss. It also had the Vanguard ability that you could counterblast 2 and choose 3 Revenger rearguards to retire. During the turn that this unit legioned, at the end of the battle that it attacked a Vanguard, you could pay the cost. If you do, stand all of your Vanguards. This ability could not be used for the rest of that turn, and even if you do not pay the cost, this ability cannot be used for the rest of the turn. Finally, on Vanguard, when this unit attacked a Vanguard, it would get plus 2000 power till the end of that battle. We also have Harbow Revenger. This was a grade 1 booster for Blaster Dark Revenger Abyss, and when this unit boosted it, it gave an extra 4000 power until the end of the battle. Moving on to the grade 3 Blaster Darks, we have Blaster Dark Diablo. This card had the Vanguard ability Generation Break 2. While you are paying the cost for Stride, if the G unit you stride has Blaster in its card name, the cards in your hand get grade plus 3. It also had the auto Vanguard ability that during your turn, when your unit named Dark Dragon Phantom Blaster Diablo stride, choose one of your opponent's rearguards to retire. Speaking of Dark Dragon Phantom Blaster Diablo, it had the ability that once per turn you could counterblast one, choose a face down card named Dark Dragon Phantom Blaster Diablo from your G-Zone to turn face up, and if your G-Zone has 2 or more face up cards, until the end of the turn this unit gets plus 10,000 power and a critical. As well as, when it attacks a Vanguard, you could sacrifice 3 of your rearguards, and your opponent chooses 2 of theirs to sacrifice as well. If 2 rearguards were not retired by your opponent cannot call cards from their hand to the Guardian Circle until the end of that battle. We also saw a starter named Full Bow Diablo, which was a support card for Blaster Dark, had the abilities both Forerunner, and when this unit is put to the drop zone from rearguard for the cost of one of your unit's abilities, if you have a Vanguard with Blaster in its name, you could search your deck for one card with Blaster Dark in its name and call it to rearguard, then shuffle your deck. And the final card we're going to take a look at is Pitch Black Sage Sharon. This card had the ability that when placed on rearguard from hand, you could show a grade 3 from your hand to your opponent, and if you do, search your deck for one grade 3 card with Blaster Dark in its name, reveal it to your opponent, add it to your hand, and shuffle your deck. Then choose a card from your hand to discard. It also had the continuous rearguard ability that while you are retiring your rearguards for the cost of one of your unit's abilities, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Blaster in its name, retiring this unit counts as retiring too. Anyways guys, that kind of wraps things up for Blaster Dark. Let me know if you like the format of all the primary cards first and then the support cards, or kind of like this way where I did the card itself, all of its support specifically, and then the next card, all of their support, and so on. Let me know in the comments as well which cards you would like me to look at in the next video, and I'd of course like to thank my patrons Decimus, Akriaza, Digital Drew 92, Card Fight Buddy Ranger, and Fisky Walkstrut. If you would like to help support the channel as well as get in on get an extra chance in the giveaways that I do, you can also check out the Patreon in the description down below. Speaking of giveaways, if you guys would like a chance to win the upcoming Bermuda Triangle booster box, leave a like, subscribe, and comment on this video, let me know what you think. You can also join the Discord, and of course, like I said, being a Patreon gets you extra entries. With all that being said though, this has been Miracle Trigger. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.